unless Papa has to speak one more time. Yep. All right. Yeah. Go have a seat, okay? All right. Let's go ahead and get started. We're going to continue on in our presentation to deal with this question about sustainable love, and also how do we look at love and relationships from the perspective of faith, of God, being included in this particular picture, and also look at some practical tips about relationships in general. First of all, I want to tell you a story about a girl named Hannah Brencher. Hannah was 22 years old in college, and her mom was a little bit different than other moms. Other moms would probably email their kids or Facebook them, but with Hannah, her mom would only write to her physical letters. So Hannah had to wait by the mailbox, and she'd have to go to the post office to get a P.O. box, to get these letters, to hear about her mother, to see how her grandmother was doing in the hospital. And so Hannah was a person that was obviously a little bit frustrated about this particular practice of her mom, but eventually, when she was going through depression and she was going through some very difficult times in her life, she remembered those letters that her mother had written her. And she decided that she was going to start writing love letters to strangers. So she would write letters, put them in envelopes, and then she would stash them in different places for different people to find. This actually grew, and next thing you know, it actually hit the campus by storm where she was, and people started leaving these things in bushes, on different tables, and all over the campus, and people would find these letters, they would read them, and then they would share their stories about how they were encouraged and how they were lifted up. And so she started an organization called More Love Letters. She says, when we live in a time when our deepest conversations happen upon a screen, when most of us have never actually listened to words of love and of affirmation in ink and in writing from another human being, she thought that this was something that was so important, and she went on the TED program and was able to share about her experience in about 4 minutes. From this, she was hoping to write a book, and eventually she did publish a book called If You Find This Letter. If You Find This Letter, about writing love letters to strangers. And the most interesting aspect about this was how many people would cling to these letters, would love them, and always want to. Eventually the post office, the United States Postal Service partnered with her. They held an event in Times Square where they literally sat down and wrote love letters to random strangers walking through time, without sickness and without death. And in this particular world, God recognized that there was still a loneliness that would have come upon him. There was still a loneliness that would have rested upon him like the morning dew. And God said, this is not good. It's not that Adam was unhappy. It is that God was committed to Adam's perfect happiness. He saw that even though Adam was happy in paradise, he could be happier if he was able to have a companion. Notice the next step that God takes. Because Adam was with animals in the garden. So when God said, it is not good for man to be alone, that's kind of interesting because Adam was with the animals. He wasn't necessarily alone. And if you think about the pet industry, even in our day, which is a billion-dollar industry, and of course you have no woman wants to be that old woman with a cat, right? That's kind of the caricature. It's like, oh yeah, no love, no nothing, you're just the old woman with a cat. No one wants to be that. And you can imagine that God feels the same way, that animals were not enough for Adam. Secondly, Adam, if he had access to God, you can also conclude that Adam had access to angels. And if he had fellowship with angels, imagine how many people that live on this earth today in TV shows and movies and all kinds of fanciful stories about how people would love to have an encounter with an angel. And yet Adam had access to angels freely, openly, and personally. Yet God said the man is alone. So there he is with animals. There he is with angels. But yet he is alone. And last but not least, he was with God himself. God was talking to him. God was the one that was meeting with him. God was commanding him. God had given him a place to live. He planted a garden. So here he is with animals, but there would still be a loneliness. Here he is with access to angels, but there would still be a loneliness. Here he is with access to God, and there would still be loneliness in his life. And God recognized it. And he said that it is not good. It is not perfect happiness. And so this is the step that God took. The Bible goes on to say, out of the ground, the Lord God formed every beast of the field and every bird of the air and brought them to Adam to see what he would call them. And whatever Adam called each living creature, that was its name. Now, this is a very fascinating passage. The Bible is very intentional about making sure that we understand that God formed the beasts and every bird of the air. The second thing that the text is very intentional about making sure we understand is that God is the one that brought the animals to Adam. It's a very important element. So God forms the animals himself, and then God brings the animals himself to Adam. And why does he bring the animals to Adam? The text here that I have in bold, it says to see what he would call them. God wanted Adam to enter into some partnership with him. God was the one who was in practice of naming things that he made. It only makes sense. Who else would name the Apple computer outside of the creator of the Apple computer? Who else would name what the website Amazon.com would be called outside of the person who built Amazon.com and designed it? Who else would name the sculpture outside of the person who sculpted it? But yet God said, you know what, Adam, I want to invite you into this experience. How does this relate to your desire to solve the loneliness that you and your divine insight can perceive in the heart of Adam? You see, God brings the creatures to him, and this is the fascinating thing, because when God made a dog, did God know it was a dog? Yes or no? Yes, he knew, because he formed it. Adam didn't form the animal. God formed the animal. So God knew this thing is going to have 4 legs. He knew that an elephant was going to have a trunk. He knew that sharks and fish would have fins. He knew that these things would have scales. He knew that birds would have wings. He knew that insects would have exoskeletons. He knew these things because he designed them. But when he brought them to Adam, he wanted Adam to name them. And naming something in the Bible is a very significant act, because the name of something is to reflect its inner nature, its inner reality. And so for God to bring the animals to Adam to name them, God must have been seeking to calibrate the mind of Adam to his mind. He was essentially saying, I want to see if Adam sees as I see. I want to know if Adam can recognize my work inside of my work. If he looks at a hippo, will he know that it's a hippo? Can he perceive what I was trying to do? And as he brings every animal, I want you to understand, there's like thousands of species of birds. And Adam had to name every single one of these things. There was a lot of calibration to happen into Adam's mind. Now, after this particular thing took place, the Bible says, after God put Adam to sleep and took a rib from his side, he says, then the rib which the Lord God had taken from man, he made into a woman. This is the Hebrew word Isha. Now, when he makes the woman, the question is, how would the Bible writer know it's a woman if a woman had never been created before? What would you call something that you did not make? You don't even know what it is. So this is why it's hard for the Bible writer to communicate the fact that God was making something completely of a different order. He was making something completely that no other being, no other world, no other universe had ever seen. This was the first of its kind. And notice, just like the animals, he brought her to the man. So here we have a second instance where God formed something and he brought it to the man. Now I want you to notice what happens when God brings her to Adam. Verse 23 says, and Adam said, this is now bone of my bones and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called Isha, because she was taken out of Ish in the Hebrew. How did Adam know that she was taken out of him if he was asleep? How would he know that she was a woman if he was not even there when God made her. You can sense that Adam now has been in the habit of naming the things that God has made. And the very calibration of his mind was that he was to see as God sees. So that when God was able to make his companion, he would recognize his companion in that person. When he brought Eve, he had to make sure that Adam had named all the animals, because the Bible mentions something that we did not talk about. When Adam had finished naming the animals, the Bible says, but Adam saw that there was no companion for him. You see, the reason why God had taken Adam to name all those animals was he was noticing there's a Mr. Lion and a Mrs. Lion. There's a Mrs. Whale and a Mr. Whale. There's a Mrs. Red Robin and a Mr. Red Robin. And any of these animals always had something comparable to them in order to multiply, to be fruitful. But Adam realized, as he named all the animals, that there was nothing for him. It was through the naming of the animals that he was to become aware of his need of companionship. It was through the naming of the animals that Adam was able to see his condition the way that God saw his condition. And this is intriguing, because that means what I oftentimes tell young people sometimes, and they ask me about relationship advice, I say, make sure you name your animals first. It is important for you to recognize what is not your companion. It is important for you to recognize and name and categorize this thing that is not your companion. You see, why would Adam still be alone when he was with animals and with angels and with God? See, the reason was because none of these things shared his nature. He couldn't sit down next to the robin or the parrot and say, did not your heart burn within you? When Jesus came into the garden, the parrot doesn't understand what happened. He can't go to the locust. He can't go to the dolphin and say, hey, don't you just appreciate this beautiful blue sky? And not to mention the very fact that God is love. In the very heart of Adam, he has a desire to be desired. He wants to be wanted, and he wants to want something. But he needs to be able to engage in life in such a way so that he can experience life with someone who sees it the way he sees it. Even with the belief in the doctrine of the Trinity, God has companions. The Father can come and say, Jesus, did you see the rapes that were happening in South Africa? And Jesus can say, I know, because I share your nature. Even God had companions that shared his nature. But Adam had no one to share his nature. There was no companionship. And so the text concludes and says, for this cause shall a man leave. Do you know, as I move into my practical advice on relationships, the first thing that I oftentimes tell young ladies is, make sure he left his father and mother. No sense trying to marry a guy living in his parents' basement. Because guess what? If he's living in his parents' basement and he can't take care of himself, he will not be able to take care of you. This is important. The text says the only reason for him to separate from the family of his parents is because he's forming his own family. So the first thing is, you leave before you cleave. You don't cleave unto your wife and then leave. You leave and then you cleave. The third element in this sequence, the Bible writer mentions, is that the two shall become one flesh. We have to recognize that in love, love is not just about cleaving, it is also about leaving. There is a recognition in this text that the person's wife is above their family. You leave them to go form your own family. And because the text says the two shall become one flesh, what the text is also trying to communicate is to hate your wife or to hate your husband is to hate yourself. I spoke at a wedding recently, and I'm going actually to speak at another wedding in Munich in about another week or so. And I recall in this wedding talking to the individuals in the middle of the ceremony, and I said to them, I said, you know, the Bible says that two become one flesh. And in becoming one flesh, if you ever decide to separate, you do not become two again. You become broken. Because you are one. And thus, the bitterness of divorce, The pain of separation that we see in society makes perfect sense. Because God looked at marriage and love and relationships, and he recognized that in love, there is the desire to become so close to the individual that sex, the act of sex, was simply to physically represent the emotional, the intellectual, and the social unity that was happening between the two individuals. That there was a possibility to come together in such a way that there was mutual pleasure in this particular singular act. This was not only pleasing one person, but painful to the other. It was pleasing to both individuals. Which leads us to the very last thing, which it says, and they shall be naked and not ashamed. This speaks so much to what Jan was talking about redefining love in terms of tenderness and self-mockery. You see, the Bible mentions here that it says, and they shall be naked and not ashamed. See, when you are naked, you are vulnerable. When you are naked, you are covering up nothing. They see everything about you, all your blemishes. And in that particular nakedness, that you could actually engage in saying, no coverings, no garments. I'm just going to let my hair down and be completely myself. Who does not feel love in that moment when they are for the very first time in their life with another individual and they can be 100% themselves only to be embraced and loved and affirmed and appreciated? That is the desire of love. Can you be naked and not ashamed? But as long as we feel like we have to put up the facades, as long as we feel like we have to doctor up the pictures and make sure our makeup is on before he wakes up, we will never be naked and not ashamed. We will never achieve to the literal nirvana of what marriage is supposed to bring and the pleasure that it is supposed to bring to the individual. Now, let me get into some practical wisdom on this as I speak for the next couple minutes. First of all, I give people 3 qualities they should look for in another person that they want to marry. The first quality is you should marry someone that charms you. The person should make you want to like them. You should not be forcing yourself. Whenever I hear people come to me and they say, but I don't really like him, I'm not really attracted to him, but, he's got a good job and he's a nice guy. And I said, listen, don't break that man's heart. Don't play with his emotions. And the irony was when they went to premarital counseling and they were engaged, and it came out in those discussions where she said, yeah, I'm not physically attracted to you. She told the man, after she had accepted his proposal, they weren't even married yet, had not been physically intimate yet, and she said, I'm not even physically attracted to you. The guy left the session, called off the wedding. And I had warned her. I said, you need to make sure you marry someone that charms you. When you think about a charming person, it's like they have a magical spell over you. It's like that's the only person you can see in the room. It's like that person, when they look at you, you can almost feel like they're looking at you. And therefore, when you marry someone, a charming individual just makes you want to like them. They just draw your affections out of you to them. And you just go home and you can't help but think about them. And you can't help but, I wonder if that person's going to be there. That's how you know the person is charming you. Now, the second quality I mentioned is you want someone that challenges you. You don't want to marry somebody who charms you but never challenges you. You'll be bored. Listen, I remember this old film that I watched as a kid called Coming to America. Some of you might know this film. And in the film, right, there's the Prince of Zamunda, right? Eddie Murphy plays this character, and as he steps in, he's there, and they're like, this is your wife. And so they go through the whole ceremony, the singing and everything. She's your queen to be. This whole thing, and he's like, man, he's so over this. And then he goes, and they say, okay, now you need to go, consummate your marriage. So there she is, and he says, what do you like? He tries to have an intellectual conversation, and she says, whatever you like. And he says, so what is your pleasure? Whatever is your pleasure. So what do you want to do? Whatever you want me to do. So you'll do anything I ask you to do? She says, I will do anything you ask me to do. He says, hop on one leg. Okay, bark like a dog. And she starts hopping on one leg, and she starts barking like a dog. And he goes to his friend, and he's like, I can't marry this. He's like, she's an imbecile. I can't marry that. I want to marry someone for love. I want to marry someone who's intelligent. And what he's trying to drive at is he wants to marry someone that charms him, but also challenges him. And in the end, he goes for this woman in America who challenges him, who basically forces him to come out of his thing and accept the fact who you are, and don't try to nickel and dime me and try to bait and switch me into marrying you for someone you are not. Be yourself. And she calls off the relationship, but eventually we know how the rest of the story goes, right? They always want to give you a happy ending. Because emotionally, because you know I'm in the film business, emotionally it is actually distressing to people to actually watch a romantic story and it does not end in a relationship. People would actually become bothered by that, emotionally. It's a scientific fact. So when you're looking for someone to marry, find someone that charms you, find someone that challenges you, because if they challenge you and they don't charm you, they will drive you crazy. You know those people who are just perfectionists on everything, right? So if the person's like, nope, I don't like that here. I don't want to go here. You go to the restaurant, you're trying to have a romantic time. Isn't this a nice environment? I mean, if they clean the forks. Then you're like, all right. So, well, why don't we go take a walk in the park? There's mosquitoes outside. I ain't trying to be out there. All right, well, why don't we go for a drive? I'm tired. I got to get up for work in the morning. Then you come home, you say, all right, well, good night. You know, why are you trying to kiss me? Did you brush your teeth? You're not even married yet. Usually married people say that, but you're not even married. And in this event, this person is constantly pushing you and saying, you could do better, and you could do this, and you could do that, and they're constantly criticizing you, which is important in the relationship. You need someone that intellectually, emotionally, spiritually, physically, that pushes you. They challenge you to be the very best person that you can possibly be. They won't let you settle for anything less than your very highest potential. But if that person only challenges you, but they don't charm you, they will drive you insane. I remember being at Eastern Michigan University, and this guy came to me, and he said, Sebastian, I have a real big problem. I said, what's going on? He says, my girlfriend, she's crazy. I said, then why is she still your girlfriend? He said, no, you don't understand. No, I understand. I don't need the story. No, he was insistent on telling me the story. So he came to me and he said, Sebastian, I want you to know that my girlfriend, we were talking in the room, and I told her maybe we should take some space. Maybe we should have some time. And she started grabbing knives out of the kitchen. And she went by the door and she says, you're not leaving. You're not breaking up with me, with knives in her hand. And I said, what? How did you get out? He said, I busted through the window and ran. I said, why is she still your girlfriend? He says, you're right, I'm going to break it off. So he's like, I'm going to go tell her. No. Call her. I'm like, don't go tell her, call her. So he called her right there on the spot. He said, look, Rebecca, it's over. He ended the relationship. A month later, I came back. Hey, man. I'm like, yo, Jeff, man, what's going on? Hey, everything's good, man. How are you doing? I'm great, man. I'm like, next thing you know, he's telling me, oh, Rebecca and I are back together. What? Bro, she tried to kill you. Like, she pulled a knife out and said, you're not going to leave me. You busted out of the window and ran. That doesn't make sense. But there he was, back in the relationship, because she charmed him right back in. But obviously, she's on a different level of challenge that I don't recommend. Last but not least, you need to make sure you marry someone and you find someone who adores you. This is a very important element. People can charm you, people can challenge you, but if they don't adore you, if they do not completely just love everything about you, they will have the power over you, but they'll never be able to reciprocate your passion to them. I learned this from a woman with Parkinson's. I was telling her about my relationship woes. I was down at a university in Tennessee, and we were just staying there at her home, and she said, Sebastian, tell me about your love interest. So I mentioned my situation, and she said, Sebastian, it doesn't sound like this girl adores you. And I said, adores me? She said, yeah, it's very important that whoever you marry, that they adore you. And then she just went upstairs and went to bed. It's like, of course, that's what wise people always do, drop knowledge and then leave. It's like, can I get an explanation, please? But I reflected on it more and more and more and realized that the book Song of Songs and the Song of Solomon is all about this reciprocity of adoration. You have to adore the person that you want to marry. Very, very important quality. Challenge you, charms you, and adores you. Now, I mention this as I come to my last couple slides. This whole element of what I call the relationship continuum. College students are always in danger of violating this. There is a continuum. There is a process of how relationships ought to go before you get to love. First of all, you have attraction. So when you first meet a person, you're attracted to them physically, emotionally, personality-wise, which is good. But attraction is not love. It is attraction. But we assume because we go to a party, because we go to class, because we go to oh, he's cute, she's pretty, oh, I'm attracted to her, automatically you think you like her, or you love her, or you're interested, but you don't know anything about the person. So then the next phase, I tell people, yes, you're attracted, but step back and ask yourself, okay, let me learn some more, and as I learn more about the individual, I become interested in them. See, if you say you have an interest in painting, or you have an interest in public speaking, or you have an interest in hockey, I'm assuming that you're learning about it. I'm not assuming that you're like playing for the NFL, the National Hockey League, and you're like, oh yeah, I'm actually, no, that's not an interest. You're beyond interest at that stage. But if you're at an interest, you haven't gone yet, you haven't committed. Thirdly, after you say I'm attracted to the person, but now I've learned a little bit more about them, now I'm interested in them, and now that I've gained even more understanding about them, I actually like them. What that means is that you prefer them over other people. That's how you know you like someone. When you say you like pizza, or I say I don't like olives, or I don't like watermelon, I'm not saying anything else outside of I don't prefer to eat this. I don't prefer to go to that place. I don't prefer this temperature outside. Attraction, interest, like, and then love. Do not confuse them. Be very clear on where you are on this continuum as you're engaging with people of the opposite sex. You know that all relationships are run by expectations. And always keep this in mind. The first thing to keep in mind is there's unrealized expectations on the south. You see, the reason why conflicts happen in relationships is because these things are unrealized. In the unrealized expectations in a relationship, whenever you find yourself in an argument, whenever you find yourself in a situation where you're like, what is going on in our relationship? Always go back to understand that maybe there's an expectation that has not been realized. So the first question you should ask in a conflict is, what was the person expecting? What was I expecting? And as that expectation becomes expressed, it leads and reveals another problem. A lot of times conflicts in relationships are because of unexpressed expectations. We didn't even tell the person that we expected it, but we expect them to be a mind reader, right? You should know that I don't like to go to Chinese food. How would I know that? You never told me. You should know that I don't like the toothpaste to be like this in the bathroom. How would I know that? You never told me. Unexpressed. And lastly, unrealistic. You know, some of us have expectations of other people that no one person can meet. It's unrealistic. And we have to be clear where our expectations lie. That is the important element. Now, last but not least, I want to end with this, which is how do you sustain love? How do you maintain interest and fire in your relationship for the long run? You see, we put a demand upon our partners to say we want them to be predictable, but we also want them to bring surprise to the relationship. We want them to be like, I know you, I know who you are, I know what you're going to do, but at the same time, we want them to have new experiences, do new things, engage in new things. It's like, well, which one is it? You know, do you want me to be the same person, or do you want me, it's like, how can I do both? And in this pressure that's upon people, it creates a problem in a tension in relationship where as people are together longer and longer, some people lose their sex drive, some people lose interest in intimacy, and so I want to provide some basic solutions. Esther Perel, she did a study, and she asked some people who had lost the fire in their relationships, she said, I want to ask you a question. When are you most drawn to your partner? The first group said, when I'm away or apart or we reunite together. In other words, absence and longing is a way to continue to sustain desire in your relationship. When you get to those people who are too smothering, they want to be around you all the time, everywhere you are, everything you're doing, every time you go somewhere, or even in this day and age with the cell phone. I mean, let somebody text you and you didn't respond. I know you got my text. Then we got Google Friends. Hey, I'm on my way. No, you're not. I can see you on the map right now. You haven't left. And in all these experiences, what's happening? We've removed the element of absence. I know exactly where you are. I know exactly your time. I know when your class schedule is. You got my text. You're screening my calls. Why didn't you respond? There's no opportunity for absence. But yet, this is such a critical part of maintaining the fire in your relationship. So if you find yourself losing the flame, try to take some time apart. One person go east, the other person go west, and reunite together. The reason for this, I'm going to explain in a minute. Number 2, the second group said, when I see them in their element, when they're doing something they're passionate about, or a party and others are drawn to them. In other words, we are also drawn to people, and desire is kindled when the person is radiant and confident. This is a huge part of maintaining the flame. Now, we go back to being away and apart and in absence. But we also want to be somewhat at a close distance in this particular example. So, for example, you can be sitting up there and say, okay, I'm going to do this presentation. And while you're giving your presentation, your significant other is sitting in the audience. And as they're watching you and they see you in your element, they see you radiant, they see you confident, they see you just eluding the fact that I love what I'm doing, that actually makes a person to be drawn to you. And so a lot of times, let people do what they love. Let your significant other engage in what they're passionate about. Let them pursue it. Let them get involved in it, and just stand a little bit afar, and you're going to find that they're going to charm you all over again when you see how radiant and confident they are and what they are doing. Last but not least, the third group said, when I am surprised. We laugh together. He's in a tux. In other words, it's just this issue of novelty. Allow the person to not always be predictable. Allow them to sometimes branch out. And it's always funny because I'm a type of person that either I dress up really nice or I just wear sweatpants. And for me, there's no in between. I don't like casual clothes. I don't like, it's like, just a couple pairs of jeans. No, I have like 2 pair of jeans in my entire wardrobe. For me, it's like basketball shorts, some Under Armour shoes, t-shirt. That's it. Or I'm wearing a suit and a tie, and that's what I'm doing. I'm learning to be more casual, to try to branch out into some new things so I can keep the flame in my marriage still going. Experiencing novelty. Because you want to surprise people. In these particular principles, you can always find that you can maintain love because it's easy to fall in love, as Monica showed us. 36 questions and staring into a person's eyes for 4 minutes. People can fall in love. But staying in love is the greater difficulty. Thank you. Tomorrow night, we're going to continue our series. Thank you for the extra time this evening. I just wanted to make sure I hit all these points on love because I know love is a big interest. Tomorrow night, we're going to be dealing with life with no fear. And we're going to be looking at people who crave at the University of Michigan new experiences, adventure. And we're going to talk about that tomorrow. So hope to see you there, same time, same place. David?